The sudden death or disability of a member in a SMSF can be a difficult and challenging time in the best of circumstances. However, in the event where a SMSF member holding life insurance passes away prior to the age of 65, a unique tax deduction known as the future service deduction comes into play. David Busoli from SMSF Alliance is with me today to shed some light on this lesser known, potentially substantial tax deduction. Hi, David.
Yeah, hi.
Firstly, David, can you just briefly outline what a future services deduction is and under what circumstances it can be used?
Okay, the future service deduction is probably underutilized because it doesn't get a great deal of attention embedded as it is in the Tax Act. We generally look at things in the SMSF sphere as by reference to the SIS Act, but it's Section 295/470 of the Tax Act actually deals with the future service deduction. That being said, it's a little obscure and it can be a little tricky to actually use, but what it allows is an alternative method of taking a tax deduction for life insurance premiums. In fact, that is the other word, or the other description, the other name for future service benefit. It's the alternative method of taking a tax deduction for life insurance. And in that respect, it does require special attention in order to get that deduction. And it's not just for death and TPD. It also applies to terminal illness and temporary disablement, even though in the case of terminal illness and temporary disablement, because of some of the other features of the other prerequisites, it's generally not that useful.
And what are some of the benefits to accessing a future services deduction?
Well, the main thing is that if you do qualify, you can achieve a significant tax deduction, typically in the order of $600,000, $700,000, $800,000, $1 million, an income tax deduction. Now, this deduction attaches to the fund, not the member account, and therefore it can be carried forward because it's highly unlikely the fund is going to be able to utilize that in a single year. And therefore, there is real benefit to it in the long term because it's an income tax deduction, and as such, it will save the 15% tax on concessional contributions and also on accumulation account earnings. So an $800,000 deduction, for example, is worth $120,000 in hard cash over a period. So if you can get it, it's certainly worthwhile doing so.
Okay. And as you mentioned before, I understand that using this deduction can often be challenging due to some of those sort of rules and requirements that you mentioned before. Do you see any risks or downsides or limitations associated with the future services deduction?
There's not really any downside of the future service deduction itself, but some of the prerequisites that need to be satisfied can create a downside if the circumstances don't fit. For example, getting down to the actual mechanism by which this deduction works, it is firstly necessary for a fund to hold life insurance. If a fund doesn't hold life insurance, it cannot qualify for this deduction. And the other thing is that the payout must be in consequence of the cessation of employment. And that's one that you really need to be cognizant of, because it's not always the case that life insurance or TPD payouts or terminal illness happen as a consequence of cessation of employment. It really means that the member has to be employed at the time that the event occurred which created the payout. That's why a terminal illness, for example, is one which is a little problematic, because you can have terminal illness and still be employed. So really, the primary focus of this type of benefit is for death and TPD whilst a person is employed. The other issue, very important prerequisite, is that there has to be a premium paid in the year in which the benefit is paid. Now, that's because this is, as I said earlier, the alternative method of taking a tax deduction for insurance premiums. So effectively, what happens is that you have the choice of taking a deduction for the insurance premium or taking a deduction based on this calculated amount. And as I said, the amounts can be quite significant. It might be a difference of, say, $3,000 for the premium to $800,000 for the deduction. It can be quite significant. But you'll see there that we have a couple of issues. One is that the person had to be employed at the time that this death of TPD occurred, and the other is that there must be a payout in the same year in which a premium is paid. Now, immediately you'll see the issue here. You could have a person whose premium is due in, say, June, and it's a yearly premium, which means if they have an event that occurs for 11 months of the year, there hasn't been a premium paid in that year, which is why one of the situations that you should always try to achieve if you are looking at potentially this benefit is to make your premium payments on as regular a basis as possible. Certainly monthly as a minimum, fortnightly if you can do it, but you need to create a situation where you will have a premium paid in the year, or at least that you will have a high likelihood of it being paid in the year. Now, there have been situations where private binding rulings have been successfully applied for where that prerequisite has not been exactly achieved, but I certainly wouldn't depend on it.
As I understand, it's not a deduction that's really or often accessed by, say, APRA funds. This is mostly something that SMSFs usually access. Why is that?
Yes, this is very much an SMSF specific deduction. The reason is not because APRA funds cannot access it. The reason is because once a fund has accessed this method of taking the deduction, then it must always use this method for taking the deduction. And you can understand that with an APRA fund, where there are thousands of members, some with insurance, some without, and also bearing in mind that this is a deduction that is taken at a fund basis, it's just administratively untenable for an APRA fund to offer this particular benefit. So it is very much SMSF specific, but not because of the legislation or because of the process.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, David, but this is a deduction that can only be used once. Is that correct?
No, you may have more than one member in the fund, and you can use it for each member, provided they each have life insurance and at some stage they each qualify. It's the method of taking this deduction, which once used once, has always got to be used by the fund. It's probably unlikely that it's going to be used more than once, but it can be. But you need to be very careful here, because for the benefit to be paid, you need life insurance. For life insurance that's being held by a fund where the beneficiaries are not tax dependents, you will create an untaxed element. So you need to be very careful and plan your life insurance around the beneficiaries that might receive this deduction. It's the formula is such that if the payout is going to a non-tax dependent from the fund, it's not always this case. It depends on a few factors, but you may find that instead of getting this whopping great tax deduction, you achieve a similar whopping great taxable untaxed element rather, and no one wants that. So one of the issues that you need to look at before you're looking at insurance generally in a super fund, and certainly this is part of that consideration, is to whom the life insurance proceeds are going to be paid, because you don't want to create an untaxed element. So there's a few things that need to be looked at here. who is going to be the beneficiary, whether the premiums are likely to be paid in a year in which the payout occurs, and what the payout is going to be for. That is death and TPD generally, because if it's terminal illness, you may not satisfy the cessation of employment situation.
Well, thanks again, David, for your time. And I look forward to seeing you again and speaking with you soon. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Todd.